in today's world, like vibe coding is coming into different industry. I don't know if Alkami Technology has adopted vibe coding in this. I guess how do you balance that the speed
Yeah.
of vibe coding versus regulation, the speed? How do you balance all that in this kind of crazy regulation industry? When I come to China like 9 years ago, when I pull out a credit card, they look at me like I'm a fossil. It's like, what? You have a credit card? Like, even the beggar on the street is using QR
Yeah.
code to beg. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm
Yeah.
this. I thought I'm a Silicon Valley tech advanced person, but now I'm like a tech fossil in China. So like, what do you see are wrong in these two industries? Like, what do you think is so wrong that you want to fix in your mind?
Most people operate in
Yeah.
the correlation space. And we've seen, like, if you adopt NPS as a metric, we've seen companies do better when they adopt NPS as a metric. But that's a correlation, not a causality, because they stop paying attention to the customer. And a byproduct of paying attention to your customer is you start doing a little bit better. But it's not causal. NPS is the worst thing that happened to products in the past 20 years.
Welcome to UX Stories. I'm your host, Lihong Hicken. I've spent my career obsessed with how we understand what users actually think. When Chris and I helped scale usertesting.com from zero to IPO, we thought we had it figured out. But AI has changed everything. The speed of building is now 10 times faster than the speed of listening. So Chris and I built TheySaid. We want to use vibe testing to match the speed of vibe coding. I'm here to talk to builders who want to deliver great experiences to their customers. My guest today is Mazen, Head of Product at Alkami Technology. Mazen has an incredible track record of leading massive product organizations at Capital One, Cox Automotive, and Credit Acceptance. He's a leader who understands how to scale complex digital experiences in industry where trust and position are everything. Mazen, beyond your Harvard Business School degree and your leadership titles, our audience want to know, who are you as a product builder? What's your mission? What do you dedicate yourself in building? What kind of product, what kind of legacy you want to leave behind in as a product builder?
Yeah, I love that question because it's sort of soul searching. And the truth is that for me, and that might be maybe somewhat controversial, is it starts with actually wanting to make a difference somewhere. I find that the best product folks are people that are on some kind of a mission. They see something that is not quite right, or they look at the world through eyes that think, well, we could do better than that. And then you end up in a position where you're transformative. Now, I'm going to use a cliche, for example, like Steve Jobs, right? He was obsessed with the idea of transforming how an individual interacts with computing and had many failures, right? Before getting into the iPhone, which arguably was, his transformative success. But before that came Lisa. And before that came, I can't remember the name of that tablet that was terrible. Like that was in the 90s, right? But for
Yeah.
him, it started with an obsession of transformative experiences, right? Because I separate building from incremental improvement. With platforms like user testing, you could do A/B testing really quick and you can just do incremental improvements, but everything has to be in service to a much larger whole that's driving you and you're obsessed with. So for me, I look at things and I have this deep obsession in a couple of places. One of them is the automotive space. I think the automotive space is still kind of broken and I still want to do something about it. And then the other place that I think things aren't as good as they could be, let's just say, is finance. You've got asymmetry of information. You've got challenges in regulation. You've got things that are deeply personal for people, right? Talking about how much money you make in the United States is a very, personal thing, right? And so at the intersection of all of these things, it comes a market that is, capital markets are relatively efficient, but at the individual level, maybe less so. Education is really important. Fear is a major motivator driver. And so in order to be a really good builder, you have to live the ethnography of the user. And, you can't reduce a user to, users are groups of people that you kind of want to assemble in outcome-based views, right? My entire career has been this like unabiding obsession with how can you make these places better.
Interesting. You have unpacked a lot here, Mason. Okay, let me just unpack a little bit for our audience here. So you said you want to make a difference, specifically in industries where you think things are not right. For example, the automotive industry and the finance industry. So I come from China,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
the recent years, like a lot of changes in automotive industry, like all these, fast, all these crazy cars coming out. Of course, US is not allowed to have them. And, in the finance industry, China has stopped, already enter into mobile payment. And when I come to China 9 years ago, when I pull out a credit card, they look at me like I'm a fossil. It's like, what? You have a credit card? Like, even the beggar on the street is using QR
Yeah,
code to beg. So I was like, oh, okay,
yeah.
I thought I'm a Silicon Valley tech, advanced person, but now I'm like a tech fossil in China. So like, what do you see are wrong in these two industries? Like, what do you think is so wrong that you want to fix, like in your mind?
Yeah. So let me start with the auto space a little bit. So I think the work that many companies in China have done is take the phone model and just put wheels on it. And to start with like a design of like you're starting with a user-centric design view of how the user interacts with the vehicle, and you just apply it to mobility. So from that perspective, I think they took what Tesla was trying to do and a little bit of what Apple has tried to do and sort of merged it together. And by the way, part of my experience has been I spent several years in China working in the mobile space. So I saw that transition from a phone to a phone on wheels firsthand. It was really interesting, right? And intrinsically, the fact that they were not tied to the auto industry actually helped Chinese manufacturers like BYD and others to actually start from the ground up to develop something that was customer centric around EVs. Because, if you look at like internal combustion engine, China's still not the leader in that space because complexity of engines,
Right.
all of that, supply chains, all of that stuff. But when it comes to battery with tires on it and wheels and tires on it, they're doing great. Like right now,
Okay.
Xiaomi Steel is the car that I wish I was driving right now. But
So
yeah,
you're saying the Chinese automotive cars are very customer centric, but I would argue that, you know, both automotive and finance are very heavily regulated, right?
is
So you had to balance this, balance the regulation versus customer centric and the speed. And then, in today's world, the vibe coding is coming into different industry. If I don't know if Alkami Technology has adopted vibe coding in this. I guess how do you balance that the speed
yeah.
of vibe coding versus regulation, the speed? How do you balance all that in this kind of crazy regulation industry?
I think so. A couple of things. One, where the U.S. is sort of lagging is less so on the automotive like side of things. You've got Rivian and Tesla that are doing relatively well. I mean, their cost structure isn't there, but their products are actually pretty good, relatively speaking. Right? They're pretty competitive. The problem is structural in how the industry was designed in the first place. So you've got like dealerships that are selling the cars and servicing the cars. You've got finance companies that are financing these vehicles. 80% of vehicles are financed in the US, and so on and so forth. So the process of actually getting you in the car or getting you service is where it's actually broken, I think. And part of the challenges that we've had in the auto space, and then I'll touch on the finance space as well, has been how do you actually leave software first, customer centric first, to design native experiences that are there to help customers achieve what they're trying to do. Most of the world, if you look at what Cox is doing, Cox's job is to actually service the dealership. And then the dealership cobbled together solutions to serve a customer. One of the jokes that we had was that, if you have about 30,000 or so dealerships in the United States, that means you have 55,000 combinations of point solutions that do different, like that connect differently to do the same thing at a dealership. And so where I see that there's an opportunity for vibe coding is that you can start actually creating experiences that are end to end for customers that, we tried to do at Cox with the essential platform, but, I don't know that the industry was entirely ready to do that. And the bottleneck there is how do you think about customer experiences and getting the right feedback? Because look, ultimately, the challenge in a B2B setting, in a B2B to C setting, which is what Alchemy
Mm-hmm.
does, for example, Alchemy designs digital banking solutions, and we design them for credit unions and banks that in turn surface those to their customers. And there's
Mm-hmm.
always a tension between, wanting to have a SaaS platform that is sort of standardized versus the customizations that each of the credit unions or banks want to do
Wanted.
so that they quote unquote differentiate the product. Now, of course, the challenge is always, and this is where I think platforms that do testing would be great. Like if two credit unions are using the same software, the perception
Uh-huh.
from the credit union is my software needs to look and act different so that it's differentiated. And I'm like,
Okay.
no, no one is cross shopping Delta Community Credit Union versus Community Bank and looking at their apps when they're deciding to actually, buy the product. Standardization is actually a good thing. The differentiation is in the services that you have, the rates that you have, the personal relationship, and the incredible amount of data that you generate so you can understand. It's not like, for me, there's a disconnect between customer experience value. Like when you think about what a customer does, the most important thing you kind of want to tease out is how have I experienced the product? So you've got like
Mm-hmm.
two levels of things you want to do. First, you want to get the customer to actually, buy the product, but then you got to get them to use it. You don't win
Right.
at just the purchase of the product. So, I think this is where I see the biggest challenge. And I just want to be just a disclaimer. I don't head product for Alkami. Ben Conan does. I head it for data and marketing, which is a division of what Alkami does. But, aside from that, the challenge has always been the biggest bottleneck I see, even before the advent of coding. Vibe coding makes it worse, is that software development and software changes not keep up with understanding your user. My biggest challenge heading product for this division at credit acceptance, etc., had always been how do you actually understand your customer at the in an almost anthropological level where you
How do you
actually know.
understand it today? What do you
Yeah.
do to understand then? This is the question.
So look, if you look at my travel schedule last year, at the end of the year, they tell you like, here's out of the 270 working days that we have, Monday through Friday, although I'm more 996, but if you look at like my actual travel schedule, I spent nearly 140 days, 137 days traveling.
Me, the
And
customers?
most of my, yes. And I'm talking
Oh,
to
gee.
them and I'm trying to understand. And it's not just talking, right? Like, I'm going to give you an example that I use all the time. So I have this,
Okay.
I don't know if you had seen it on my desk. This is a mocha pot. It makes stuff. I've never used it. I've had it for a while. I think it's beautiful. I've been wanting to actually use it. And every morning I wake up and I do my coffee the way I always do. Never use the thing. It's beautiful. I love it. And the if you look at my purchases, right? And if you look at my NPS, you could say
Uh-huh.
that my intent was really high because I actually put money on it, right? And I'm very happy with it, which is stupid because I've never used it. Like, how could I be happy with it? It's aesthetically pleasing. Other than that, like, what does that really mean? But if you look at my experience value, it's zero. I spent money on
Right.
something that I've never used because I've never gone over the hump of actually doing it the first time. And so I
I
think the
love
biggest
you
challenge for
mentioned
me,
the experience value because the NPS doesn't measure experience value. It just you have to take what their word for it, and sometimes you can't really take what their word for it. You have to observe their behavior and hear their thinking, which is I'm just hearing you think aloud, talking about the experience of this
yes,
beautiful pot that you never used.
yes. And here's the thing is that the biggest missed opportunity is that you don't know, not you, just a person has struggles to turn a customer into an advocate. That's where the best companies win. And that is a function of your customer experience value. And if you look at our code at Alkami, if you look at our code at credit acceptance with CAPS, if you look at Cox, if you go back to Capital One and Samsung, most of the features are unused. I'll give you a really good example of that. We spent time developing support for the Apple Watch because what Alkami at its core does is digital banking. We are a white label digital banking provider for credit unions and banks. And so we created an app, an extension that supported the Apple Watch. How many people used it? It was the lowest used. Think about the code and the complexity and the deployment and the testing and the regression and everything that you have to do. And think about the fact that the customer puts it on, but never uses it. So the biggest challenge is not how much you code. The biggest challenge is what do you code for that is really differentiated and you spend most of your effort there. I think the worst thing that could have happened is vibe coding, in the sense that it allows you to spit out so much code of very low value, and it makes it a lot harder to narrow down on the things that matter the most. And so most of my time when I travel, I'm trying to understand one thing. What are the 1, 2, or 3 things that are so differentiating, and you want to nail those experiences and then forget about the rest? It's less important. And so vibe coding is actually creating a challenge for me that is quite the opposite of what people think is.
I totally agree. I mean, just look at the product hunt every day, thousands of low quality, not sure what purpose product is built. It's just like pulling a shit product out there. I think what you just said, I think vibe coders should listen to it every day when they wake up in the morning. Like they should listen to it. Like, what is the actual customer experience? Like things that they built, they pull out a lot of code, the user doesn't use it at all, means zero. It doesn't mean
Yes.
anything.
I'm going to use somebody much smarter than me to say it differently. There's this thing about Einstein. If there was a problem and I had an hour in order to save the world, I don't remember the exact quote, but his point was I would spend 59 minutes thinking about the problem and I will spend 1 minute designing the solution. And vibe coding has done the opposite. And if I have one bit of advice that of anyone that's using vibe coding, is stop coding and start engaging with your customers really deeply, as deeply as you can, because the code is easy to generate now. It's no longer the thing that actually prevents you from putting out something. Your challenge is understanding your customers, because your customers don't understand themselves well enough. I don't understand myself well enough when I bought this. If I did, I wouldn't have spent money on it. So you have to understand your customers at your deepest level. And
I think three
look,
episodes ago,
we all have good intentions.
I understand. I wish I have listened to
Yeah.
this. So 3 episodes ago, I've talked to a vibe coder who said we haven't done usability testing. They said NPS and user product usage data is a new user testing. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It's like, what do you mean? NPS and product usage is a new user testing. So in order to generate enough product usage data, bad experiences, you had to deliver in order to get significant number in
Yes.
order to make the decision. So it's like you are intentionally create bad experiences so that you can make a decision. I was like, I can't try your products. It's like, who, why would you build bad experiences as a product builder? The world doesn't need more bad product experiences, right? So, what would you say
I
to
have,
someone like that?
yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with NPS. So here's the thing. One of the other pet peeves that I have is correlation versus causality. Most people operate in the
Yeah.
correlation space. And we've seen, like, if you adopt NPS as a metric, we've seen companies do better when they adopt NPS as a metric. But that's a correlation, not a causality, because they stop paying attention to the customer. And a byproduct of paying attention to your customer is you start doing a little bit better. But it's not causal. NPS is the worst thing that happened to products in the past 20 years. Probably not the worst thing, but it's one of those things that I really have an issue with, because NPS, first of all, it's kind of really hard to get at the heart of something. And if you look at the best NPS numbers come from someone who's had a really bad experience that you fixed for them. That's terrible. Like, the
You
incentive
had
is
to
so
have the best.
pernicious, right? That's right.
Yeah.
But the problem is you're trying to take something really complex and really hard and you're trying to scale it effectively. And ethnography is not something that scales really well, at least not today, because it requires years of experience of understanding what question to ask, what to listen to, and to formulate follow-up questions. But not only that, but then you have to take it back from the field to synthesize it, then develop it into a product. This whole kinetic chain is really hard to scale. This is why I still think product is such an alchemy of, no pun intended with the company name. It's at the intersection of art and science. It's not that it's art per se, but you have to do it so often and learn from your mistakes for you to succeed. And now you've got platforms like user testing has helped. What you guys are doing, what they said, that helps as well. I would say to this developer, to answer your question, is spend less time thinking about what your product should do and more time thinking about what is it that the customer is trying to do. Broaden your aperture to understand from a service design perspective, what is it that the customer is trying to achieve within the context of their life, and how can you make this 10x better? That's
That's
the
amazing.
problem that you should be solving before you code for anything. And now that vibe coding makes it so easy, right now there's like this gold rush towards vibe coding. But you know what? Most people are going to end up losing because now the barrier to entry is very low. So anyone can produce anything. I was talking to
No.
someone who is incredibly smart, love him, a mentor in many ways. And he said to me, "Is like, how come it should be easy to replicate now? You know, you could just vibe code most of it." And the answer is yes. And it's like, well, why shouldn't I go and do that? That's because everybody else can replicate something. The problem is
Yeah.
not in producing the code. The problem is understanding exactly how do you end up fitting in a customer's life. And it's about these connection points. And vibe coding is not going to solve that for you. Vibe coding is not going to solve the relationships that you have for data ingestion with third parties, how you think about solving the problem, the models that you use to synthesize customer behavior, how you think about pricing point. Like all of these dimensions of product, vibe coding is not going to solve for you. In matter of fact, it's going to make it worse because it becomes, can I curse on this podcast?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, it, it becomes like the shittification of product. The same way you can find 1,000 different variation of the same crappy product on Temu that costs $9.99, where your margin as a producer of that is a penny. The exact same thing happens with vibe coding. You have lowered the barrier to entry of code, and so now you have a lot of crappy code. So why do you stand up? How do you stand up? Now, some people are going to make money. They'll go public. Some things like that will be great, but in the balance, you'll see a wave and then you'll see a crash. And the same thing that you saw in the late 1990s, early 2000s with that bubble,
Yep.
you'll see the same thing happens. And the same thing that happened to Yahoo being at the crest of things. Yahoo forgot what it really was supposed to do, and now it's just a small little division within Verizon that was an incumbent, for
Yeah,
telecom.
exactly.
That's not a
Lost the
success
sight of
story,
your
right?
Yeah, if you lost the sight of your customer, you lose the war. It doesn't matter how fast you can build, you just build the wrong thing. You know what?
Exactly.
It feels very like a healing listening to you like destroy vibe coders. I don't know. I hope the audience here can feel the relief too. Like, I think people just these days are fed up with, a lot of shitty experiences out there, right? Building more,
Yeah.
building faster doesn't
And
mean the right thing.
and a lot of complexity. Look, one of the things that, Lihong, if people underestimate neurocognitive load with people, vibe coding is going to give you a lot more point solutions. The winners is
Right.
not the point solution. The winners is an integrated end-to-end thing that helps me do the thing I want to do, not somebody that does a slice really well. And you are going to see all the people that succeed are going to go from the slice to broaden in thinking about the entire customer end to end, as opposed to I could do this faster or whatever. I mean, look, here's a good example that most people are going to be familiar with. If you look at what Uber had done when Uber came online, Uber did not
Yeah.
solve the transportation problem, right? Like you still got in the car. Somebody still drove you to the car to where you ended up.
Yeah.
What they did is solved everything that happens before finding the cab and what happened after, which is payment.
Right.
That's a broadening of the aperture and fitting better in your customer life. And most of these vibe coders right now are so excited about just slinging code that they even forget about who it is that they're slinging the code for. If that makes sense.
Exactly. So yeah, totally. You know what, Mason? I don't know if you do podcasts a lot or you talk a lot. You will be a great guest if we ever host like a debate. Like we get a bunch of vibe coders, a bunch of people who wanted to like do usability testing properly, like and then get the debate, and get it going. Like if our channel ever break like let's say 1,000 subscribers, let's do a debate. Let's make it fun, and I will invite you as one of the
I love
guests. Would
that.
you be in for that? We love it. Cool.
I
Awesome.
would be very much in.
That's awesome. I actually previously hosted a debate for NPS, which is called Is NPS a Vanity Metric? And the first
Yeah.
debate about NPS, and it was on YouTube. But, the conclusion was like NPS is a vanity metric, and the winning team was
Yes.
then, and because they have the metric to data to support that. But if you guys are interested, search on YouTube, you will find the debate, and it was very fun. We could also offer a similar debate on, vibe coding testing, usability testing. But I really enjoyed the conversation. Can we go into some rapid fire questions? So since you
Sure.
believe in usability testing, what's your current feedback stack or like usability testing tech and Alkami? What you guys do to do usability testing?
Yeah. So the challenge for us at Alkami, specifically where, the area that I'm in right now, is that I can count on, I can actually meet all of my customers. And because your customers are banks, right? They're credit unions and banks. And so, we have about 300 very large customers and we can spend a lot of time with them. And my preference is always I actually sit with the folks that are using the product and look at what they're doing. So in this particular case, this is probably not a very good example. But if you look at I'm going to fish back into my previous experiences. When you look at things like credit acceptance, where we have tens of thousands of dealers that are actually using the product, that's much harder to do at this point, right? So, what's your scaling mechanism? So for me, I tend to not use one point solution, but rather constellation of different solutions that you put together. And it always starts with two things, right? The first one is I want to see my adoption metrics, frequency of adoption. We talked about NPS being a vanity metric. Yes, it is, because there's a much better metric out there, which is how often are people using your product? Now, adoption metric is a double-edged sword. Because if you have a lot of, if folks are using the product a lot, it could be because there's a usability problem. So you want to pair that with constant conversations with your customers to ask them how they're experiencing the product and where the friction is. I'll give you one very good example of where we had some power users that were reworking a deal 60 or 70 times. Wow. So using the platform over and over and over again. And it looks like adoption was going through the roof, right? Like they were very power user. But the fact is they were trying to do something else, which is they were trying to optimize and squeeze every dollar out of it. So the question became, how can we help them get there? Right. But if you look at only the adoption metric without actually looking at the
why is the behavior.
If you don't marry, yes. So you always need to pair the what with the why at the same time. And so I like platforms that allow me
Mazen,
to.
sorry. I'm curious, like, I know you were traveling like 147 something days out of a year. Like, why would you adopt something like user testing.com to do usability testing at scale, watch, your users use your platform, record a video and think aloud process? What's the reason of not using a tool like this? I no longer work for user testing.com. I'm just asking, like, it seems like all the large companies are using them, or they stop using them because they're too expensive. They got acquired by private equity firms. But why are you not doing that rather than traveling?
Yeah. So the first thing is two things. One, traveling for me is a grounding effect because you're actually with the customer. Most of the value that I've gotten out of talking to my customer had nothing to do with using the platform. It had to do with what are the friction, right? Because if you broaden your aperture, you see a lot more. Second
more
is that when you're using user testing, etc. Yes. Second is that, and people naturally talk when you are trying to understand. And so you have a greater understanding of the whole. This is like a gestalt effort for me always, is understanding the whole is a lot more powerful because then you can determine there are much more important things than the things you were focusing on. If you take something like usertesting.com, you're looking at that solution itself. Maybe there's something much greater somewhere else. And that's what I'm always seeking, because my goal is, whether it's Alkami or any other company I'm at, is to provide durable competitive advantage. Durable competitive advantage does not look at what is happening right now. It looks at the broader picture and understand the trends and the changes that are happening. For example, the introduction of vibe coding changes the interaction that you have with code itself. So if you're somebody like Sonar, you may look at user testing and say Sonar is like it's doing its job really well, right? But it's not looking at the broader picture. So that's one. The second one is that with usertesting.com, it's very scripted. Most of the value that I've gotten has been unscripted questions that occurred as I'm observing them doing something. I'm like, hold on, why did you not do this? Or you see something that's happening that interrupts the process and you ask about that. Or you see them like printing something out that you wouldn't see on usertesting.com and then physically handing it to someone. Why are you doing this? Oh, I have some compliance requirements that you didn't think of, right? So while usertesting.com is very useful for some of these things, and it's really useful for medium to low-fi prototyping, I focus my time on asking questions in the magic quadrant. Like if you look
I
at
see.
of the amount of time that you spend on things that are really urgent and the amount of time that you spend on things that are really important, most of the time that people spend is on urgency or as an axis, never importance. So most of my time when I build out my team is we focus on what is the most important thing and we spend most of our time there. Now, that comes with another
Yes.
challenge with leadership to say, hey, look, leadership, what you're going to see is nothing happening for 6 to 12 months. And then suddenly you're going to have an unlock of value that is an inflection point that is huge. That's because we spend most of our time doing homework and understanding and solving for the right thing, as opposed to giving you incremental changes. I'll give you one metric for that to kind of bring it home for your viewership. At Cox, we used to have a really good product that converted at about 1% when the leading product in the industry was converting at 1.5%. We
Wow.
spent 9 months working on the product, and you could see our conversion rate hover 1.1 for 9 months. And then when we did all of our changes and our releases in a couple of months, we went from 1% to 5%.
Whoa, that's
That's
huge.
because, yes, and that's because we obsessed over the entire chain. Because look, what really matters is not like if you think about leakage of a funnel, you're trying to optimize for leaks at every stage. What
Yes,
sometimes that's
totally.
great. I didn't mean for that to happen, but yeah, maybe that's
That's great. So, Mason, thank you for the example. So, for our audience to understand, so what Mason's thinking is he values the moderated testing, meaning a human in the room with the users observe and interact, guiding the users to go through this, because that actually results in a more in-depth finding of users' wants and need, not just like
yes,
where user testing.com is very good at unmoderated testing, which is no
correct.
human involved, it's strict scripted, it's very good at scale but not as deep. So
Correct.
that's what you're doing. So what one thing we're building at TheySaid is AI moderated testing, which is AI act as moderator. You train the AI about your company, what you are trying to do, and AI will ask diving questions. So it's not as deep as a human moderator, depending on how you train the AI agent, but it's somewhere between the human moderator versus unmoderator, and is in depth and is at scale. So maybe that will be like a supplement to your traveling. Like the benefit is at scale. You can do this hundreds of thousands of interviews, as well as you are doing these human interaction with your customers. So rather than having a single point of always relying you on the traveling, but you could have these human AI moderated tests that's in depth, plus your even in depth human interviews. I think that's kind of give you access to a scale customer research,
Yes,
customer understanding. That would be
yes.
something. If you have a magical wand, like what's one thing that could make gathering human feedback from your customers dramatically easier? That will be my last rapid fire question.
Yeah. So I think that has the potential to be a game changer, but from another perspective for me. Most of my time has been spent when I'm building a team and I'm thinking about is on education around, how do you think about the user, what questions to ask. There's a lot of ethnographic skills that comes from a moderator. Now, typically where I've always insisted that the product manager needs to be the moderator, but it's really hard to do that really well because there's bias issues. As you're running a test, you come in with a perspective. And what I love about what TheySaid is doing and other tools like that is that it does two things. One, it removes some of the bias in wanting to actually get to the question that I want to get to because I'm human, right? And most of the time, you got to fight that urge to want to take the customer in a particular view to reinforce your own perspective, right? That's the hardest thing to do is to just remove yourself from the equation, remove the ego. AI doesn't have ego. Now, the quality of the training of the AI and how do you get it to actually be like you want your LLM to be very non-biased, non-sycophantic when it asks questions, etc., right? So that's one piece. And so it frees me from having to spend a lot of time on educating my product managers about how to do it right, although that might have a dark unintended consequence. The other thing that it does is it allows me to scale. And even though the quality of the data that I get from something like that may not be as good, the sheer volume of it and the ability for it to actually touch a lot more people, you know, I don't know if you've heard the saying, quantity has a quality in and of itself.
Yes.
I think as a product manager, as a builder, I would want to take this tool, combine it with some of the travels that I have, and the ability to vibe code and a bunch of other things together that rethinks how product shows up.
That's amazing.
That's how I would use that platform. That's probably going to be food for thought for when I engage with the team around some of these things. Young, thank you. I know we're coming out to time. I just wanted to thank you for the
Yeah.
opportunity to talk to you. It was a lovely conversation. I look forward to more conversations with you. This was amazing.
Yeah, Mason, I love your pulling your heart and your passion into the podcast today. I love your perspective on building while keeping, deeply understand the users, combining vibe coding, moderated testing, they said AI moderated testing. And then for those listening, if you are vibe coding, if you want to make sure that you build the right product, solving the right problem for the right audience rather than just pulling out tons of code that doesn't solve any real problems. Make sure you visit TheySaid.io and sign up for a free account. Start testing with your real users, understand your deep users deeply. And if pricing is not a problem, what is your excuse not to understand users? Okay. I'm Lihong Hicken, and this is UX Stories. I'll see you in the next episode.